I have this little problem. I can see you fine. I can't see this quite as well, and I usually use glasses, except then I can't see you. So I put this thing low to see whether it will work for me. There's a movie that was made in 2002 called Catch Me If You Can. Carrie and I just caught up to that movie the other week. It's about Frank Abagnale, Jr., and as a teenager, he ran away from home, and trying to survive on his own, he became an imposter and a check forger. He posed as a Pan Am pilot, an attorney, and a pediatrician. He was very, very skilled at it, and he could change his identity by whatever he needed for the moment. He managed to stay ahead of the law for a year and a half, and then he told his girlfriend's parents that he was a lawyer and a Lutheran. But when the relationship with Brenda grew serious, he confessed to her that he was a con artist. Frank said, "Brenda, I don't want to lie to you anymore. I'm not a doctor. I never went to medical school. I'm not a lawyer or a Harvard graduate or a Lutheran. Brenda, I ran away from home a year and a half ago when I was 16. Brenda responded, Frank, you're not a Lutheran? Eventually, he was caught and served 5 of his 12-year sentence before being released to the federal authorities. They wanted his expertise in uncovering and investigating check forgers and other cases of fraud. Our character, Jacob, was an accomplished trickster, too. In fact, the trait seemed to run in the family. When the twins of Isaac and Rebekah were born, the parents chose favorites. Isaac loved Esau, and Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, as the older twin, Esau was entitled to the birthright and family blessing. One day, when Esau, a hunter, came in from the hunt, starved and demanding food, Jacob tricked Esau into trading his birthright for a meal. Later, Rebekah helped Jacob trick his blind father, successfully stealing the family blessing as well. In order to escape Esau's murderous threats, Jacob had to run off to his uncle Laban's house. He discovered Laban was also a trickster. Jacob worked for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. On the wedding day, unbeknownst to Jacob, Laban sent Leah into the marriage tent. And so Jacob had to work another 7 years in order to win the one he loved. In total, Jacob worked 20 years for Laban, most of it without pay. When Laban agreed that Jacob could have all the spotted lambs in the flock for his wages, Jacob tricked Laban by increasing the spotted lamb population in a most unique and questionable way. And if you want to know more about that, check out Genesis 30. I've always been appalled by the nastiness of this family, considering that Jacob is one of the 3 patriarchs through whom God established his people. There's a story about John Rockefeller that puts him in the same category as Jacob and his father. After important negotiations with business leaders in his high-rise office, John D. Rockefeller used to say goodbye to his visitors at the elevator. When the visitors filed into the elevator, an innocent-looking man would get on the elevator with him. He would follow the group out the door and across the street. and he would listen to what they had to say after their meeting with John Rockefeller. A few minutes later, the innocent-looking man would go back to Rockefeller's office to deliver a detailed report of what the unsuspecting visitors had said. Oops. The two scriptures that Deb read are separate accounts of God meeting Jacob the trickster when he was fleeing from Esau's revenge. In the first story, Jacob was anxious and fearful, exhausted from running. When nighttime came, the environment wasn't particularly friendly. Being a lightweight compared to Esau, he would have preferred a Holiday Inn to this lonely, rocky bed. He managed to sleep, and in that lonely place, he dreamed of angels hurrying up and down a stairway to heaven. And then God appeared. God came to him and promised him that he would go with him wherever he went and protect him. God reiterated the promise that he had given to Abraham, I will make of you a great nation. All the people of the earth will be blessed through you. These promises speak of God's desire for relationship. Scoundrel that he was, Jacob didn't deserve these promises, but that's the way God is. Even when we're wretched, God doesn't forsake us. Barbara Brown Taylor writes about Jacob in her book of meditations called Gospel Medicine. She said, when Jacob wakes, he's still a double-crosser and a deceiver, but he is also one of God's chosen one, a visionary who does not mistake what he has seen. How awesome is this place, he declares. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. He took his sleeping rock and poured oil on it in an act of worship and called the place Beth-El, house of God. But Jacob is still Jacob. He follows up that statement of faith with a profoundly foolish if-then vow. If you stand by me and protect me and provide clothing and food and bring me back to my father's house, then you will be my God, and I'll return 1/10 of everything that I receive. The second story takes place 20 years later. God had honored Jacob's request for presence and protection and provision, and when Jacob headed back to his father's land, he was a rich man. But fear of Esau's revenge intensified when Jacob learned that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. To appease his brother, Jacob divided up the wealth into 2 companies of gifts, keeping only his wives, their maids, and the children with him. Again, it was nighttime. A man showed up and picked a fight with Jacob, and they wrestled until daybreak. Jacob was winning. And when the man tried to get away, Jacob held on tight. I won't let you go until you bless me, he said. And in an effort to get loose, the man kicked Jacob in the hip. What's your name? He asked. Jacob. Remember when he said, I am Esau? The man said, no more will you be called Jacob. I'm changing your name to Israel. And Jacob named that place Peniel, the face of God, because I have seen God face to face and lived. Jacob's permanent limp was a constant reminder of his meeting with God. It was his place of remembering. Wrestle's an interesting word. We don't usually think of wrestling with God. Taylor says, we live as though relationship with God were settled and all the rules were clear. Be a good person and God will be good to you. God is supposed to restore the status quo and help everyone feel comfortable again. Isn't that how you know God is present? When the danger is avoided? But in the book we call the Bible, much of God's best work takes place in total chaos. Pleading with God, there's Elijah trembling under a broom tree, pleading with God to take his life. And there's Mary listening to an angel's ambitious plans for plunging her into scandal. Paul lying flat on his belly on the Damascus road with all his lights put out. Perhaps because we know these stories and know how they turn out, we overlook the wrestling. God, on the other hand, isn't ready to grant wishes. God is in the business of raising the dead, not all of whom are willing. Walter Brueggemann adds, people are driven to poignant prayer and song precisely by the experiences of dislocation and relocation. It's experiences of being overwhelmed, nearly destroyed, and surprisingly given life, which empowers us to pray and to sing. Taylor would like to ask Jacob one question. Jacob, why didn't you run away when you had a chance? And she thinks Jacob would respond, because it was the most alive I've felt in my whole life. Because I'd never seen anything like the shining in that face, and I couldn't bear to leave it. Taylor challenges us, do you know where your Beth-El is? By the way, the E-L is God. The place where the dream of God was so real to you that you can still remember how the air smelled, how the light fell, how your heart beat so hard you thought it was going to break. If you do know, then treasure that knowledge always and go back there often. But if you don't know, because you've not found it yet, or because you can't find your way back, well, don't be too hard on yourselves. You've got a lot of company. You see, we dreamers aren't what we used to be. We do not have time to dream, for one thing. We are too busy leading, managing, ministering, feeding, teaching, fixing, pleasing, and working to dream. In order to dream, you must be able to flee all that and lie down in a lonely place now and then, a place where there's nothing going on but the slow passage of stars across the sky and a slight wind with a whisper in it. You must be willing to lie low and to be good for nothing for a while. Taylor goes on to say, it's not about being good. Jacob certainly wasn't that. Jacob was alive. A golfer friend told her, if you always hit the ball straight, you miss a lot of territory. What dreams have we missed in the rough because we've worked so hard to keep in the green? For Jacob, the dream led to spiritual territory that he had never experienced before. There's a story about Lori Foley, who as a teenager found a large rock in the woods. She called it her thinking place. Lori would sit on it and be still and think through her problems. But one day on her way to the rock, she was hit by a car. And although she was partially recovered, she was unable to make that trek anymore. When asked what she wanted for her birthday, Lori said, I wish I could sit on my thinking rock again. The Department of Public Works moved that 2-ton rock to her home. The rock mattered to Lori because it was her place to be still and dream and grow. Beth-El was no exotic place. Genesis calls it a certain place, nondescript, full of rocks that stood like gravestones, a most unexpected place to meet God. And yet after Jacob's experience, he claims, how awesome is this place? God didn't wait until Jacob got his life together. God comes to us no matter where we are on God's journey. Catherine Huey says, As Jacob's descendants in faith, we too experience God in more places than just church. We may have a place in nature or a quiet spot in our home, or we may stumble upon sacred ground in the most unexpected places, like hospital waiting rooms, or the operating room, or the doctor's office when we get our diagnosis. What are the promises we hear? What are the dreams that we hear then? God promises, I am with you always, wherever you go. I will provide for you. You and I can make it together. When we meet God, we feel alive and want to respond, how awesome is this place? This is Beth-El, the house of God.